organizing effectively an internship. But even before COVID, I've found, and I've made it a bit of a personal mission to encourage individuals, particularly undergraduates, recent graduates, to pursue internships. And the perspective that I bring is, a reasonable amount of experience in mentoring interns in both the small company environment and a large company environment. So before moving to San Diego, I worked at ExxonMobil Corporate Research in New Jersey, and that's actually where I first had the opportunity to mentor an intern who was actually a high school student at the time, and is now a chaired professor at Rice University. But since that early experience, I've really seen mutual benefits from working together with an intern. And more recently, most of my experience has been in a much smaller company environment, although I also have, I've worked, for example, in the past also as part of Corning, a Corning company. But I also, by one mechanism and another, also have, reasonable connections on the academic front and the national lab front. So I've served over the years on, advisory boards for national labs like Sandia, and for various academic groups, like in the bioinformatics area for Boston University, for the Computational Science Research Center at San Diego State, and materials programs at University of Cincinnati and elsewhere. So, I've accumulated a bunch of experience over the years on those. And the internships that I personally have supervised or mentors do cover a very broad range of topics. And I'll say a little bit more about how they're selected in a moment. Most of the interns that I've worked with directly have been senior undergraduates or recent graduates, although, as I've mentioned, in a couple of cases, there've been people at high school level, and in one or two cases, it's a little bit rare, but people who are a bit further along in their careers. And given that I've been living in San Diego for the last many years, most of these have been structured in San Diego. So the campuses involved are mainly UCSD, but also some of the community colleges and of course, San Diego State University as well. So those are kind of the perspectives that I bring. And, when asked what's my motivation for committing time and energies to to engaging and working with an intern, there are a number of answers to that. And the first is that there's that element of recognizing the value of an internship, seeing then if one can provide an opportunity for same or facilitate such an opportunity, it can be of real value to someone perhaps early in their career that might even lead to making some important career decisions. The second thing is a lot of the projects that I've been involved in with interns, that they're usually chosen such that we don't want to do something that's mundane and uninteresting. That we're really looking to do something together that has the opportunity for having real impact. And I do enjoy working with with smart, creative, enthusiastic, motivated individuals. And two of the people that I've enjoyed working with in this capacity over the past few months are on the call, Gavin Dahlia and Summer Batterson. So if you have any questions, you can ask more about them. A fourth reason is that we're all busy. We never have enough time to do everything that we'd like to do, and working with an intern can be a way of finding time and resources to work on problems that would otherwise not be considered. In some cases, but not all, a motivation for structuring an intern project is to advance something specific in a company agenda or supporting that. That actually, in my case, turns out to be substantially less than in less than 50% of the cases, and I'll explain that more in a second. But I'm particularly interested these days in this interface between research and business. I mean, how you move things from concept, from early discovery to the point of realizing impact. And usually that means pursuing the capability, the technology, the concept under the umbrella of a business for various reasons. And so quite a number of the internship projects that I've been committed to are identifying and pursuing and developing further new business concepts or opportunities. And I think in the present context, the present audience, this needs little introduction, but why is it so valuable to do an internship? And I should stress that when I talk about an internship here for you guys on campus, I'm talking about an internship that takes you off campus, that takes you out of the academic environment and puts you maybe in the uncomfortable position of working typically with a company. The bioengineering program at UCSD still, I believe, has a 4-credit academic internship as a possible senior course. So over the years, we've hosted at Tioga Research a number of bioengineers that would work on a specific project on maybe a 2-day or a 2-afternoon a week basis over the winter quarter, and received academic credit as a result of that. The second reason is that it can be very beneficial to when you're positioning yourself for a job, particularly in industry, but even if you're going to med school or your goal is to do something else, it can really evidence your ability to take on new challenges in a different context. And thirdly, particularly those interested in going into industry, it's a way, potentially, no guarantees, of teeing up a full-time position as an employee. And again, at Tioga Research and predecessor companies, we have in the past done that, engaged people on an internship basis to work in the lab, and then subsequently, when a position opened up some months later, decided we really wanted to keep the person as an employee. The fourth is, particularly if you've developed a good relationship with your mentor and or supervisor, often they're the same person, then that person is likely to want to help in terms of writing recommendation letters. There are certain weeks when I seem to spend a significant amount of my time writing such recommendation letters. Obtaining a job, particularly in an industrial environment today, it's either very beneficial or essential to have the appropriate personal introductions or networking. And by working with a company for a while, getting to know people, connecting with them, that helps someone relatively early in their career build that broader network. But it also exposes you, particularly if you work in a small company environment, it exposes you to the various facets of the company that are necessary ingredients to commercial success. And that, if all you have is exposure to, research, either, paper research or in-lab experience on campus, you're much less likely to get exposed to issues like, marketing, market analysis, business development, patenting, patent strategy, which might well be directions that ultimately resonate most closely with you as a person. There's some fantastic high quality research that goes on within companies, and it can be it tends to be, very focused on directions that are going to move, advance the company agenda. But working in a company does give you, practical experience in at least the area of research that the company's involved in, and exposure potentially to other aspects of the company that I've said. What I put low down the list is compensation, because unless it's essential for you to receive some financial consideration for what you're doing, I tend to argue that the benefits of doing an internship well outweigh the value of pay if you're actually pursuing a paid internship, and I'll explain a little bit why that is in a second. And it also lowers the bar, and I've given you one example of that already. If you're interested in joining a company, whether large or small, and you've already got work experience as an intern in that company, that makes it, unless you've screwed up and not done a good job for whatever reason, it's going to make it much easier for the company to recruit you in a similar sort of capacity or even a different capacity later on. I thought I'd put this slide in, particularly under the present COVID constraints, because finding finding an opportunity and actually being selected as an intern in a company can be very difficult. In town here, larger companies like Illumina, they have a formal program of engaging a number of interns, but most small companies don't. And so if you're interested in a small company experience, historically it's been really difficult to find and capture an opportunity. So you need to be, and the recommendation is to be pretty creative in how you approach that. So there are various ways of going about that. One is, as I've mentioned, if you're in bioengineering, you can call up Isgard, who's well connected with a number of companies, and she can make introductions to you, particularly if it's the for academic framework. Secondly, quite likely faculty, particularly in nanoengineering and bioengineering, faculty that you have gotten to know through them lecturing or supervising experiments, it's highly likely they have connections in industry and would be willing, if they know you, to facilitate introductions. The career center can be valuable. I think that depends a bit on which particular interests you have. Most internships that I personally have hosted, I'd say 90% of them, if not more, have not been posted. If we were to post an opportunity for an internship, we would likely post it on the UCSD opportunity website. But there's certainly, just because something is not posted doesn't mean there's opportunity. So a web search, and here you're looking not necessarily for opportunities that are posted or advertised, but for companies that have in the past hosted interns, particularly on the small side, because then if they've done it before, they're more likely to be interested in doing it again. Advisory board, again, there's often academic connections in company advisory boards. Cold contacts can be a tough one, but I was chatting, as I was mentioning to Ryan earlier this afternoon, with a bunch of one-on-one with a bunch of students from UCLA, and in a couple of cases, a suggestion that I made was that they define where they'd like to have an opportunity and then go through a process of, for each of the companies in that space, somehow finding an appropriate contact and pursuing that and reaching out to them. And there's a number of ways that you can increase the likelihood that you'll get an appropriate response. The final thing on this list, again, this is particularly beneficial here in San Diego, is the biotechnology industry organization, Biocom, part of their mission is in workforce development. And so particularly the Biocom Institute, is part of their mission is to facilitate internships happening. And minimally, the Biocom, www.biocom.org, website provides a list of some 700 members in the San Diego region. And minimally, that gives you a list of many of the companies that might be potential hosts. So it can be hard, but there are opportunities out there, even under this necessity in many cases for doing it virtually. I thought it would be worth just saying a few words about, so if you have any questions or whatever, just kind of raise or comments, please just raise your hand, and you know, I'll interrupt the flow for that. I thought it was worth coming back to this issue of whether to, you know, look for a volunteer or a paid position. How important is it that I be paid? So for some of us, in order to pay the bills, particularly if we're doing an internship on more or less a full-time basis, you know, having compensation for that, you know, would become essential, and that would be a deal breaker if that's not possible. I've mentioned already, though, the kind of three frameworks that under which one might undertake an internship. So for academic credit, we talked about, it can be paid, it can be on a volunteer basis. What I've found, certainly in the way that we approach internships, is there is usually a substantial difference in the nature of the project that the intern undertakes, depending on which of those frameworks it follows. So a paid internship, typically, we are looking for someone to come in, often in the lab, to be an extra pair of hands in the lab. And that typically means that they would be doing relatively menial tasks, like, you know, helping someone else set up experiments, you know, taking care of documentation or you know, cleaning glassware, those sorts of things. And the reason for that is, you know, in any lab, it takes a significant, unless you have directly relevant experience and substantial experience, it can take you know, several weeks before you can be productive in a new laboratory area subject to the processes and protocols that we have in place. So it's generally not practicable to engage someone in that capacity to take on a project for which they're the real owner in the lab. The second point to consider is that a lot of you know, even though you would think for you know, a moderately sized company, the dollars involved in sponsoring an internship can be relatively modest. What you typically find, any company has a budget, and that budget is broken down into lots of little buckets. And if there isn't dollars available for an internship, then the likelihood of them hosting one is it's not zero necessarily, but it's quite small. Whereas if one goes in on a volunteer basis, then, you know, that issue has gone away. Under California employment law, there are some key requirements that need to be satisfied for a company to engage an intern on a volunteer basis. And one of those is that the intern not be doing work that the company, that employees at the company would, an employee at the company would otherwise do. And my interpretation of that is then that the work that an intern does should not be something that the company would otherwise be doing or would have an employee be doing. And further, that means that the internship should be structured in such a way that the intern has their own project and that they're responsible for the success or failure of that internship. They're not helping someone else do something. They're kind of have that full measure of responsibility. And whenever I'm involved in a project, you know, particularly these days, you know, I really don't want someone else telling me what to do. You know, I don't mind having an objective set, but how I achieve that objective, I prefer that to be up to me. And the final point to think about here is the dynamics in your relationship between you and your mentor and supervisor and company are often quite different depending on whether you're hired in as a paid research associate or whether you're contributing on a volunteer basis. What I tend to feel is if I've been mentoring someone on a volunteer capacity, the onus is a bit on me to help that person, in their further career development. Whereas if we've hired someone and we're paying them, even if it's a relatively small amount, I feel that, we've adequately compensated them for their contribution through the fact that they're being paid. So in general, all I'm saying is that it's not a simple decision whether to take on a volunteer internship or a paid position. I mean, I confess the first time I engaged an internship on a volunteer basis, I was pretty hesitant to do that because I was thinking, well, they're going to put work in and, is it fair and reasonable that they're not being paid dollars to do that? But the more I've worked with interns over the years, my perspective, my hesitation on that has completely changed. In part because, if someone is really keen to do an internship with me, it's and has the skill set and the time and everything else, it is relatively rare that I will turn them down. I mean, or provide a flat no. Okay, so so when we think about a virtual internship, when putting together, when thinking about kind of what are the key ingredients for success, I came up with 10. And so if you are the lucky winner of the first prize in the drawing, do you want to say more about that, Ryan? By the way, given that we got a couple of new entrants in the.
Yes. So for people who just joined or joined a little later, we have please fill out the RSVP form as you'll be entered into a raffle to receive a free copy of Dr. Newsom's book.
So this is spelled out in the book, and I'm probably going to say things a little bit differently, but I'll run through the 10 points that I think are really important in structuring an internship. So if you're going in to work with someone else, I mean, it might be that these are things that you might want to raise in a discussion with them about the structuring of the internship. The first thing is that I've found that when I say intern, I actually rarely mean one individual working on their own. And what I've found over the years is, and this is not in the lab, this is someone that would be doing online research or interacting with people in a way, in something other than being in the lab doing experiments. I found that 2 is an ideal number, and there's several reasons for that. But one of them is that one individual early in their career can find it, if their interaction with a mentor is other than, ongoing on a very regular daily basis, it can be relatively easy to kind of hit a road bump and, lose momentum and a bit motivation. And the problem is when that happens, it's very hard to regain that. Once kind of the wheels have gone out of someone's tires, it's really hard to pump them up again. If you have 2 people working together on a project, they're both relying on the other, and so that there's an element of joint energy produced. And when one's feeling a little bit overwhelmed by other things, the other can be carrying the ball and so on. Concomitantly, 3 or more. When there's 3 in a group, it can be really hard for any one individual to assume, appropriate responsibility. That there always seems to be, someone else that should be doing something rather than me. 4 I found is a nightmare, and it's a nightmare because scheduling a time to even discuss as a group gets to be really hard given how full people's agenda is. And beyond 4, I've only once done that, and I'll never do that again. It was almost a complete waste of my time. The second point I find that is really important. So when someone has decided, or a team of two people has decided they want to do an internship with me and we've agreed it makes sense, more often than not, what I do is I kind of, we'll do an interview, I'll look at the resumes, and what I'll try and do is choose a theme for the internship that resonates with the interests of the two individuals involved. So as one example, a few years back, I was chatting to two students on campus that, that I thought would work well together. They didn't know each other before beginning this project. And what both of them had done is they'd volunteered time with various charitable, well, in each case with one or two charitable organizations. So what seemed to fit with them was then a project directed to non-profit organizations. And so their program was specifically focused on how local to San Diego non-profit organizations could make better use of online tools in developing, that would be kind of locally focused in developing better fundraising opportunities. And so I've got a whole bunch of other examples like that. The third thing, and again, this tends to be different whether it's paid or unpaid, but I find it really important that there be a clear goal for the project, and it shouldn't be an easy goal. It should be a challenge. It's not going to be achieved in all cases, but spending time really thinking about that and having it be measurable, be something for which metrics can be associated is important. But just having a goal is rarely sufficient, because, if it's only going to be realized in 30% of the cases, there'd be a lot of frustration if things don't work out. So I find it also valuable that we map out sub-objectives that are steps that need to be accomplished in order to realize the goal. So it's kind of like we know where we're going on the map, that's our goal, but we also have a little bit of a sense of the landscape that we need to cross in order to arrive at the goal. The fifth thing is there should be a defined timeline, and I actually like to set, a start date and a defined end date. How long should the distance between those be in time? In my view, 3 months is good. 2 weeks is way too short. You can never achieve anything in that sort of time, particularly if it's on a part-time basis. And even 6 months is too long. Certainly 12 months is way too long. So 3 or 4 months I've found is ideal. Now, a lot of projects, a lot of progress is made in that 3 or 4 month period, and the intern team really wants to continue work on the project after that. Well, that can be done by beginning a new project on top of the old that has a new 3 to 4 month time frame. So I hate the idea of saying, okay, well, we got here, let's just extend the timeline another 3 months. I think it's a lot better to begin a fresh project at that point. These days, I like to make sure that things are well documented. And so we have a template internship agreement, often it's on a volunteer basis, that puts in some of the language that you will have when you begin a job at any other company in terms of confidentiality, intellectual property, work product ownership, but that also includes this other information we've referred to, what the goals are and what the steps are, but that also includes the expectations on me as the mentor and supervisor. Talking of that, in my view, supervision should be sufficient but not excessive, meaning that the intern as a team is responsible for success or failure of their project, but it's my responsibility to make sure that they're suitably enabled in information access to other things that they need in order to succeed. But the last thing an intern wants is me looking over their shoulder at everything they're doing and micromanaging that. And I think that's the same you know, whether it's an internship or a full-time employee position. It is important that there be a regular schedule of discussion, though, and most of the internships that I've hosted, we meet for an hour once a week. I mean, that's my typical. In some cases, it's more frequent. I occasionally things will happen and we'll miss a week, but you know, meeting every other week is, I think, is really insufficient supervision. So setting a regular time and date is important. Number 9 is also important, that you know, if you're doing an internship project, you want it to be a success, and typically that means that you've established a basis on which someone else, maybe in the company or another intern, can come in and build, you know, stand on your shoulders to take the program, the idea, the concept, the project to the next level. That can happen only if there's reasonable documentation and information communication. And so maintaining and keeping well organized notes is pretty important. And the final thing is, having set a defined end date, I think it's quite important that the intern at that point summarizes their project, the successes or failures, and does that usually in a couple of ways, documents it in writing, but also makes a presentation to an appropriate audience who can, you know, appreciate the level of effort that went in and the caliber of the results that came out. So for me personally, these are, you know, 10 key success elements to an internship. If you're interested in learning more and you're unlucky in getting neither the first prize this evening or the second prize, you can get a copy of the book. I should point out that, you know, I'd love lots of people to read and get benefit from this, but, you know, I get essentially, I don't make any money off any sales of any of these books. Just keep that in mind. So, but if there's information in there, then that might be valuable. I'd be delighted if you got more info from it. The final point that I wanted to make before saying thank you is to point out work that two of the people on this call, Gavin and Summer, that I introduced earlier, have been working on. Gavin, if I can go into a little bit of detail, Gavin, if I don't embarrass you, but Gavin really impressed me. I think it was a career fair. It was probably nanoengineering or bioengineering, and it must have been kind of late last year. Gavin arrived at Tioga Research, had a booth, and Gavin was one of several individuals that came up to chat. But Gavin really impressed me in the degree of homework that he'd done before coming up to speak. So he clearly knew a lot about me. He said, you know, he knew a lot about the company. You know, he conveyed things like, yes, I listened to your TEDx talk. I really enjoyed that. And, you know, so immediately I'm thinking, well, you know, this guy is determined and has really done his homework and is really enthusiastic about the idea of doing a project with us. Those are key attributes, you know, in any interview you go into. You know, you express that you've done your homework, that you're enthusiastic, you're going to move up the queue in terms of consideration. We had a great conversation, and then Gavin began an internship project with me. It must have been, I've forgotten what date it was, Gavin. It's already seems so long ago, maybe the beginning of this year. And what Gavin really wanted to do was to figure out how in the San Diego region, we could make internships more accessible and more successful particularly for students who are suffering the consequences of the COVID constraints. And there are really 3 elements to that. The first was to devise a portal that would facilitate internships being made available and students identifying opportunities. The second part of this was to facilitate both students providing information about themselves and companies providing information about potential internships. And critically, in order for this concept to work, more local companies, particularly smaller local companies, have to be willing to host internships. So part of the program was for for Gavin to figure out how local companies could be persuaded to be engaged in hosting virtual internships at this time. So I was delighted that Gavin checked all of these boxes, did a super job of coming up with a web portal, and he chose the name Bucky. He can explain why for that, why later. But the idea is this will be a portal that would facilitate undergraduates at UCSD from finding, identifying, and realizing the opportunity for virtual internships with local companies. The URL is shown here, although earlier today Gavin took pains to point out that this is still at beta stage, and so you can see, he welcomed you kind of playing around a little bit with a website, but you don't want to sign up formally at this point, but there is a mechanism for maintaining info. But the idea is that there's a tremendous value to being able to find and gain and get the experience of an internship with industry. From the student side, I would argue strongly that there's a real value to companies in hosting internships, particularly at the present time, virtual internships. And what we needed was a way of encouraging both to pursue this and then provide the mechanism which this will all work. So I'm optimistic that Gavin, working with Summer also on the call, can actually make this be a really valuable resource for people like yourselves at the present time. And finally, I'd just like to say thanks. I've had the very good fortune of working with a lot of interns, under a number of different corporate umbrellas and academic umbrellas over the years. I've listed a few, recent people I've had the good fortune to work with here. I've given my email address, and would love to follow up with any of you further if you have any other questions, and thank you all for calling in this evening.
All right, thank you, Dr. Newsom, for giving your talk, and I guess we can open the floor now to anyone who has questions. So for questions, you can either unmute yourself and ask away, or if you don't want to turn on your mic or your video, just DM them to me and I'll be free to ask them to Dr. Newsom.
May I ask a question?
Certainly not, Sharon. Go ahead. Yeah.
So I'm a freshman, and I really want to get involved in internships and researches. Would you recommend a freshman to apply? Because I've searched for internships on Handshake and also the Jacobs School of Engineering portal, and the minimum requirements is second year. So
well, and keep in mind that is an academic requirement, right? And so I would say, my advice, I mean, I've personally supervised people even in high school, or people between high school and college, and a lot in college, but at various years in college. I kind of think it's a shame when people leave the idea of doing an internship until halfway through their senior year. It's very difficult to, is to find and complete an internship if you do that. And so I think absolutely looking now is not a bad thing to do. Now, the challenge a little bit is, for doing work in a lab, for example, what you're going to find is, it's one of the questions will be, well, what's your experience in the lab? And particularly today, you know, the answer is going to be, well, almost none. And so that's going to make it really difficult for you to be competitive with more senior students for that sort of position. But there are other projects out there for which, you know, Sharon is ideally suited. It's just a question of how do you go about finding them. So I definitely look. And how do you go about that? Well, maybe Bucky is kind of a vehicle to help. Handshake is great. You know, connecting with, you know, ISGARD, Hook, and, you know, Career is good, but also building your own network. You know, if you know people, or, you know, your friends know people in local industries, you know, connect with them on LinkedIn and build your network that way. And, you know, let it be known that you're looking for an internship opportunity. So personally, I you know, if you want to do it, why wait?
Okay. One question here is, in one of your 10 points, you mentioned that that you pair a student up with their interests. How can a student express their interests when applying for an internship, or is that something that's done afterwards?
Well, no, and I may be, you know, I'm not sure everyone does things that way, Ryan, or whoever asked the question, but it's particular for, you know, on a volunteer basis. Whenever we engage someone on a paid basis, it's to do something pretty specific. You know, we need extra hands in the lab. You know, on a volunteer basis, in my view, it's really important that the project be something that the company, the organization would not otherwise be doing, and that it be a project for which the intern can be in charge or responsible. And, you know, to be successful in anything you do, it's a huge plus if you're enthusiastic about what you're doing. And so, you know, so the way I infer that is not necessarily by asking direct questions. It's by kind of looking at what the individual has chosen to spend their time on outside maybe their academic studies. Because that, you know, I mean, I often joke, you know, if you go into for an interview and the interviewer asks you a question, well, do you have leadership potential? I mean, who would say, well, no, right? No one's going to answer negatively to that. So if you've got any sense when you're interviewing someone, you're not going to ask that question, right? What you will do instead is you will try and find out if that person has done things, has spent time doing things that evidence their interest in going in that direction, their latent skill for doing that. And so that's why I typically, there's no magic formula to this, but usually I'll, you know, look at the resume, what's on the resume, and I'll ask a bunch of questions about what the person has spent their time on, you know. And sometimes, you know, I'll spend an hour with a group of, you know, team of 2 people, and at the end of the hour, I'll say, I've got no idea. Let's meet again, you know, in 4 days and see if I come up with something in the meantime. But I wouldn't be surprised, Ryan, if that, you know, if that's just my way of doing it. You know, I haven't chatted to a lot of people, but I haven't heard of anyone kind of structuring things quite that way. But it seems to work quite well for me, and for the groups that have worked with me, I think.
About resumes, I guess this is more of a general question, but there is a common problem where students feel that they need to have a good resume to get into projects and internships, but they need previous internship or project experience to get into those good projects and internships. So what advice would you give to students trying to sell themselves or trying to build a resume when they've only taken academic classes?
Well, you have to keep in mind that, you know, that if all I'm looking at is a piece of paper, right, then absolutely it's going to be hard for me. If someone has 0 experience in something, and, you know, all they've done is research, and they're really interested in, they think they're interested in doing something a bit different, and all I've got is what's on paper, I'm going to say, this is not going to work. But that what's on paper is not you, Gabrielle, right? So if you don't have the experience, right, and you want to get it, you have to kind of think beyond the paper. And the way to do that is to do exactly what Gavin did, is you go to a career fair and you talk to people and you develop that kind of relationship, and you communicate with someone that might have an opportunity. Well, this is what I'd like to do, and this is why, right? This is why. I don't have experience yet, but because of where I want to go, I'd love to have the opportunity of working at your company. Have no interest in Illumina or Northrop Grumman or any. I'd really like to work with your company, with you. And can you help me think about how I might go about doing that? And the additional piece, to come back to where we were with Sharon, it's the networking thing. I mean, if I get a resume from someone that lists, worked with Mike Saylor, right? Then what I'll do is I won't tell you, the applicant, but I'll call Mike and I say, Mike, I've just gotten a resume from Gabrielle. Should I throw it away, or should I look at it? Or, even someone I know vaguely at some different campus, if I know the person, I'm quite likely to send them an email, right? And so the networking thing is important. Most internship opportunities don't get advertised, right? I mean, 95% of the interns that I have mentored, I connected with them not through an ad, it's through meeting, in my class, there were people in my class at UCSD, or they met me through through some other event, or they got an introduction through someone I know. So the networking side is, I think, important, particularly if what you have on paper isn't as impressive as the real Gabrielle.
Thank you for that.
Along the lines of that questions, I also have a question. So I am a first year currently, but I have experience taking courses for first and second year. How would I build a connection for internships if I don't have experience on paper?
Well, and I say the same thing. So are you on LinkedIn, Albert?
Yes.
So the problem with LinkedIn, it's like the snowball. The bigger it is, the bigger it gets, the more rapidly it gets bigger. And so you start small. But what I would do, I'm not going to give you all the answers because I don't know them. But what I'd be thinking about is, okay, clearly, if I want to access opportunities, I need to keep my eye open on things like, on the career website, and, Indeed and other things, Handshake and other things. But I need to do more than that, because I don't have the credentials. I need to build this network. I need to build connections. How can I go about doing that? How can I go about it? So one of the students from UCLA that I was chatting to earlier today was in a very similar position. And so, I gave a few suggestions, but one of them, I mean, she's originally from Indonesia. So I said, well, the first thing I would do is, I'd ask, I'd connect with the local, there has to be, an Indonesian culture group or community group. She's in the LA area. Contact them, contact the president of that group and say, I need help. Do you know people in your group that are working at these sort of companies? Can you introduce me? So, those are some of the things I would think about. You connect with people. It's like some of the faculty whose courses you've been taking, even if you've not met them in person, and have a look at their resume, their websites. Oh, so-and-so is working with this company, right? He can, if I ask him, he can minimally make an intro or tell me who I should be talking to there. So, I'm astonished when I present at something like this and I don't get 20 LinkedIn requests immediately following this, right? I'm volunteering my time to meet with you, And so if you connect with me on LinkedIn, you know, pretty quickly, you know, a second or third connections, you'll have a whole bunch of people locally in San Diego. So my recommendation with the UCLA students earlier today was make sure you send me a LinkedIn request today. I get so many requests these days that most of them I completely ignore. I hate to say that. Emails I tend to always respond to. LinkedIn requests most of the time I ignore. So, but if you do it now, later today, I'll remember and I'll typically accept. So, but that's what you need to think about is okay, I don't have these credentials. Therefore, to be successful in my search, I need to do some other things. I need to leverage the connections I currently have directly and indirectly to build that network and let it be known I'm an amazing person, and anyone would give their right arm to have me work for them on an internship basis, whether it's paid or on a volunteer. And you want to sign up for Bucky when Gavin will let you.
Okay, thank you so much.
All right.